All right, let's bring this meeting to order. The February 16th, 2021 Newburyport Conservation Commission meeting taking place on the Zoom platform. This meeting is being recorded. Before we get into it, I just wanted to do a little vote housekeeping. So I discussed it with our Concom parliamentarian, Gretchen, and she is of the belief that for any decisions like, in certificates of compliance or anything like that, or, anything else, there's an actual decision, we need to do a roll call vote. But for like going in and out of the public hearings, we don't need that. And adjournment, we don't need that either. So that's how we'll do it from now on. First item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes, February 2nd, 2021. Anybody have any comments, changes, suggestions?
You have a question on one of these, the Kim Goulet one. It says the value of the additional living space has been estimated at $7,000, which is less than 50% of the appraisal value of the structure. I don't recall them saying that number, but 7,000 seems awful low. I'm just wondering if that's the wrong number.
I don't recall them saying that number either, now that you mention it.
It was in their documents. They didn't have-
Okay,
Yeah, it was in all the
Got it.
appraisal stuff that they sent, that the value of adding one bedroom was $7,000.
that's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I assume that was very close to the 50% of the appraisal value anyway, but it seems like a strange number for that.
I'll double check
Yeah.
before I post.
Okay. Hi, Dan.
Thank you.
How you doing?
That was all I had.
Okay.
Well, in that case, should we table the approval of these minutes? Can we get an answer on that?
I
Yeah,
got
maybe
it.
till the next meeting.
I looked through the documents that were on the website for the application, so that's how I got the number.
No? You want to table it till next meeting, Paul?
I'm okay with that,
Okay with what?
putting it off to the next meeting or doing it tonight. Everybody else does.
What do others want to do?
Do you want to put it off to the end of the meeting, and while I'm listening, I'll look at what I downloaded from the website?
Just to confirm, that's a great
Yeah.
idea, Gretchen.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll table it till the end of the meeting. All right, then. Again, hi, Dan, and our new member Carol is also on here too. In that case, next item is the Plum Island updates. Julie, we have anything?
So what I have for Plum Island updates is that probably, as you all know, there's been a tremendous amount of storm damage out in Reservation Terrace at the dunes that are basically gone between 75th and 73rd Streets in particular, with a lot of sand and water in the roadway there, and damage to infrastructure and damage to people's homes. So the mayor has been working with the state agencies to try and figure out that they originally were the ones who, a couple weeks ago, before the last storm that we had in early February, they paid to install another 150 of those super sack sandbags, which then in that Tuesday storm, they put them out there Tuesday morning. The Tuesday storm came, they were all demolished and sort of washed away again. So now the mayor has been working with the state agencies, EEA, Department of Environmental Protection, Mass DOT, which is Department of Transportation, Department of Conservation and Recreation, and our state legislators to come up with a next solution or a next protective measure to try and prevent additional damage to the roadway and to the homes. And what they're working on right now, through Anders Bjarngard, who works for GZA, DOT has hired Anders to put together a plan that involves, I believe, and Joe, you were sort of involved in this conversation too, right? Timber pilings that would be spaced 10 feet apart. So I'm trying to visualize this, and I haven't seen a sketch of it or a plan that really shows what they're proposing, but I'm imagining timber pilings, driven pilings, 10 feet apart. In between them, tied in, would be coir bags filled with sand, or coir logs or coir bags filled with sand, or some other sort of natural sand containment measure in between, and that those timber pilings would be responsible for holding those bags in place. Is that what you understood, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, and David, do you have any additional comment on that?
No, and that's the way I heard it explained at the mayor's briefing.
Right,
That was, I guess, last Friday or something, but that's what.
yeah, last Friday morning, right. So I haven't heard none other than that's what they're looking at, and Anders is working on it. The issue that I have with it is that it's still not permittable in that format. It might be permittable. They will have to come back to us. The original emergency certification for the sandbags will not suffice for them to put in this new system. So they would have to come back with either another emergency certification request or an emergency certification request followed up by a notice of intent for this whole new system. So we'll just have to wait and see when that comes forward and how the planning on that goes. I'm sure we'll get more updates this week or next week. I'll let you know.
Go ahead, David, or whoever was talking.
Well, DEP in Newbury permitted the core bags down there in Newbury. There weren't any driven pilings associated with it, but I wouldn't consider poles 10 feet apart to be a solid structure.
Right.
I would think of them as just holding the bags in place. And at some point, when there's another more permanent solution, that those would be taken out, or Mother Nature may do it for us.
Yeah, Mother Nature may do it in the meantime. Julie, is there any chance we can get some sort of agreement from, assuming they do something like that? Could we get some sort of something from DEP saying that they would be fine with it?
That's what I'm going to ask for. If it comes in the form of an emergency certification request, I'm going to ask for something in writing from someone at DEP that states that they feel it's appropriate and permittable in that location, because it will have to be followed up by a notice of intent. In this case, I believe they're not just putting sand down. So, but I think you're right. It might be that this is the only, in terms of creating a structural solution, an engineered structural solution, this might be the most structural thing that is actually still permittable under the Wetlands Protection Act.
Yeah.
So-
Just a heads up, your video from your camera is frozen. I don't know whether that's going to translate into your, if you're doing the presentation or not. Oh, now it's less frozen, but
Okay,
pretty glitchy.
I would assume.
okay.
I would assume since DEP is involved in, I think, in coming up with this plan, that they would approve it.
Right,
Well, they wouldn't sign off on something
Yeah.
they don't approve. So
but
Yeah, right.
just giving us some sort of guidance on it ahead of time,
Yeah, especially having it in writing.
or something.
Are core bags the same bags they've been using the past 2 times?
No. Those are called super sacks, and those actually aren't made of natural fiber. Those are like vinyl, sort of synthetic bags, woven bags. The core bags are actually made of a coconut fiber. You've probably seen it. It's almost like it's used a lot in landscaping, this sort of brown coconut fiber.
It almost
they
looks like
create these-
burlap.
Yeah, yeah.
And
They
it breaks
fill them
down.
with sand. Mhm.
And if it's 10 feet, that more than likely they're gonna construct it on the beach as opposed to bringing it in. I mean, it's a pretty large bag that's gonna be.
Yeah, they're gonna have to fill them with a lot of sand.
Well, and they did them in Newbury, or even the ones that they did at Himani's, they filled them on the beach.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then do they sew the bags together? In one bag to the next? So that it's a long continuous thing?
Yeah, they
know
sew them
it's a-
together normally.
Yeah, I think at the center they sewed them together. I don't know about Hermione.
So,
Yeah. My
so I
concern
read
is
that
how,
document that the mayor referred to about sediment, the new sediment study.
Mhm.
And I actually read most of it. There was a lot of technical stuff that I didn't spend a lot of time on. But one of their suggested solutions, and this was down in Newbury, was adding more groins, which
Really?
they admitted would probably not be permittable. But I would think if you remove the groins that are there, you might improve the situation. Because, sand deposits on one side and the roads on the other.
Yeah, that seems weird. I guess I gotta read that thing, because it seems like a long time ago, Army Corps, even Army Corps realized groins weren't doing anything,
Right.
what they wanted them to do.
But the other thing that was not in that paper was that they didn't make any reference at all to sea level rise. So when they were making suggestions for solutions like putting sand on the beach, and they projected, if you put this much, it'll last 6 years. If you put this much, it'll last 10 years. And if you put this much, it'll last 15 years. But I believe their assumption was that sea level was remaining constant, which it isn't. So I don't
Mhm.
think their projections of how long putting sediment on the beach, how long they project it to last are accurate if they're not taking into account sea level rise.
right, maybe not. They may have just been thinking that the rate of erosion is so much greater than the rate of sea level rise that the solution is still something that's realistic for the, time being.
I don't know if you take, like John Eric's assuming it's a 6-foot rise in sea level by 2100, which is like almost an inch a year. And you're saying something's going to last 10 years and there's a 10-inch rise in sea level at the same time.
You're right. Well, you're right, Steve, because any solution that we look at for that whole area or any part of Plum Island, any infrastructure that we would invest in, and any restoration project that we would invest in it should be looked at in relationship to sea level rise and whether or not it's worth it, right? How long that's going to give us and what the actual cost benefit would be.
Right.
And they're not really, that study doesn't look at that at all.
So their suggestion for Reservation Terrace was a weir in the jetty.
Which is, of course, what Bill Sargent's been saying ever since they built the jetty.
Right. Yeah, he's been saying that for what, 10 years?
Yeah, whenever they built it, that's,
But again, that 10 years ago, we weren't thinking sea level rise was as rapid as it is today. That jetty is going to be completely underwater at high tide in the not too distant future.
So it will be a weird jetty.
Yeah, it'll be a weird jetty whether we do anything or not. So anyway, those were my comments on that document. It
Those
is,
are really good points, Steve.
if you get a chance, read it.
Is that on
It is very interesting.
is that on the city website?
Donna mentioned last week that it was up on the city website. I don't believe it is on the city website. I sent it to Steve. Actually, I think that I had already sent it to all of you, but if I
Did you send it to all
did
of
I?
us?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I thought so. And Carol, I'll send it to you. I put it on a Dropbox to get it to Steve too, because it's a really big file and it doesn't always go through by email.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, it's a really interesting document about how sediment is being is moving around on Plum Island based on the currents in the river and in the ocean. And the reasons why we're seeing erosion in certain places and not in others. So it's pretty good.
So,
document.
so it was a Dropbox link?
Well, I gave Steve a Dropbox link last week because he couldn't get it by email. But I thought that I had sent it to all of you by email already.
Yeah,
And maybe only Steve wasn't able to receive it. If you don't have it, I'll send you all the Dropbox link. I'll just do that anyway.
All right. All right, then. Next, we have, we're all done with Plum Island updates, yes?
Yeah.
All right, next item is Bartlett Mall Frog Pond proposed improvements.
Okay, we have several people online here. I'm going to promote Wendy. I'm going to promote you to a panelist so we can see you. And Kim Turner, I'm also going to promote you to a panelist. If there's, and Lisa Reed as well. If there's anybody else here who is representing that project, sort of helping give the presentation, raise your hand and I'll promote you to a panelist as well. Everyone else can stay in the attendees list. And I'm going to start sharing their presentation. Let's see, I have a PowerPoint. Can you all see? Hold on a sec. Can you all see this PowerPoint photo of the Bartlett Mall?
Nope.
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Okay, hold on.
There
Now
it
we
is.
Can you see
All
it
right.
now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great.
All right. Can you start at the first slide?
Sure. Is this
Thank
the
you.
first slide?
Yes, thank you. So thanks everyone for your time tonight. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. My name is Kim Turner. I'm the chair of the Newburyport Parks Commission. Julia, I think can you do slideshow so that we get a full screen?
Oh, let's see.
Slideshow is on the top.
Oh yeah,
Keep going.
Yep. see
Great.
if that works from beginning like
Yep.
this.
That's great.
You
So-
might have to take it out of, you might have to put it into edit mode. Nope,
There you go.
never
Great.
mind.
Okay.
All right, so again, Kim Turner, I'm the chair of the Parks Commission. With me tonight, I have Wendy Goldsmith. She's a PhD and the director of the Center for Urban Watershed Resilience, and her expertise lies in climate adapted waterfronts and infrastructure, as well as water quality science and green infrastructure planning. So what we thought we would do tonight is I want to go through briefly is a pretty substantial history of the Bartlett Mall, and then I'll touch a little bit upon what our plan is, or what we hope our plan is for improving the water quality, and then I'm going to hand it over to Wendy. So just briefly, the earliest maps of the Mall are still recognizable today, which is pretty remarkable that the Mall really hasn't changed much since the 1600s, when early colonial settlers used the kettle hole, which is the Mall. It's a natural kettle hole as a place to graze and water livestock. During the 1700s, it was used for industry, rope making primarily, although there was a windmill here at one time, a potash factory, and in fact, there actually was ice harvesting as well. So it has a pretty substantial industrial history as well. Then in the 1800s, it was transformed from a place for industry to one for beauty and pleasure exclusively. If you can go to the next slide. In the very early 1800s, through the efforts of Captain Edward Bartlett, the promenade in front of the courthouse was created, which is that elevated walkway that runs along High Street. And in doing so, a deep ravine from the head of Green Street was cut off and it was filled in. And what that did is it cut off a fresh water supply to the pond, and it became stagnant at that time. So if there's anything we want to kind of have you guys take home tonight, it's that the water has been an issue for the city since 1805. It started to smell, and it became a problem for the city at that time. If you go to the next slide. In fact, there's historic newspaper articles that tell us that by the late 1800s, the city faced two choices. The first was to actually fill in the pond and bring it nearly up to the level of High Street, which luckily everyone thought was a bad idea, or to try to aerate it by bringing in a fountain. So in 1891, Edward S. Mosley donated a fountain to the city. And it's actually pretty interesting that he selected it out of a Fisk Company catalog. So it really didn't have at that time any real connection to Newburyport. But again, the point was to try to aerate the water and remove some of the smell. Next slide. The fountain did a pretty decent job of keeping the pond somewhat clean for about the next 100 years. But in the 1980s, the water quality really started to substantially decline, and the fountain actually disintegrated. And so a fundraising campaign began. And in 1987, Jeffrey Briggs, who's a resident of Newburyport, and he's an internationally renowned carousel sculptor, donated his time and his resources and created this brand new fountain that we see today, which is 3 intertwined swans. That what he was hoping is it cleverly increased the aeration by having 3 spouts of water instead of 1. Although at that time, Jeffrey and others in the city kind of warned the city that the water quality declining was a serious issue that they should remedy. But at that point, the city actually opted not to connect the fountain to a municipal water source. And what I should note is that in the late 1800s, for at least some period of time, and we're not sure exactly how long, the fountain was connected to a municipal water source. So there was a source of fresh water coming into the pond. Also, we are researching right now that we believe there was a sewer pipe that ran down Green Street to the Merrimack River, and we believe that it was an outlet for the pond at that point as well. So the city made 2 decisions when this new fountain was put in 1987. One was not to connect it to a municipal water source, and the second was that there was a stormwater plan that went in at that point. I'm not clear, it's not clear to me whether it was curbing or stormwater grates, but what it did is it diverted any remaining surface stormwater to the pond. So again, really cutting off any input of water to the pond after 1987. The water quality declined so quickly at that point that the fountain was really only on for a few years, and it's been shut off for almost 2 decades. Next slide, please. So just a quick brief history since the 2000s. In 2014, the city had a study done which identified what was in the pond. We hired a firm and we identified arsenic, chromium, and lead in the subsoil, and TP, or total phosphorus, in the sediment. At that point, the company that we had hired recommended dredging the pond, which is both extremely expensive and not super environmentally sensitive because it makes a toxic soil somebody else's problem. And some actually believe that you wouldn't be able to dig deep enough to remove all of the toxic metals and cyanobacteria, which would cause a proliferation of cyanobacteria and harmful algae blooms. Because cyanobacteria is limited by TP. And when TP is removed, the cyanobacteria can proliferate and cause HABs, or harmful algae blooms. Next slide, please. In 2017, just a few years ago, the city took a chance on a pilot project. It was a reverse osmosis system to try to clean up the water. Unfortunately, it didn't work because it didn't take into consideration the volume of TP in the muck. So every time the water would be cleaned, the TP would keep coming back into the water column because there was just too much of it to be cleaned out. It's also questionable that some of the TP that was removed did cause that cyanobacteria to no longer be in check and proliferate and cause HABs. Next slide, please. So that brings us where we are today. And hopefully this picture is as shocking to you as it is to the rest of us. This pea green color that we're seeing is indicative of harmful algae blooms and a eutrophic condition in the water. It's toxic to wildlife and small animals and also to people. So we're sort of at a critical point right now where we really need to deal with this water quality issue now. Next slide, please. So who I have with me tonight, Wendy Goldsmith, I'd like to sort of pass it on to her. She and Vlad Novotny, who's a resident of Newburyport, and he's an internationally renowned water scientist, have really donated very graciously of their time to the Parks Commission over the last year or so to give us feedback on what they see, what their thinking is, and given us a plan which we hopefully can move forward with. So the point of tonight is to sort of walk you through our thinking in our next slide and hopefully get some feedback from you all on ways to move forward. Wendy, do you want to take it over from here?
I'll even unmute and in order to do that. So I wanted to start by saying we've just submitted a grant application. I say collectively we, because all of the people that Kim mentioned teamed up to put our best thoughts into a grant application to gather some information that we think is really important, which is a detailed survey of the pond bottom conditions, the depth of the muck, and the little bit of probing about what's underneath the muck. We have an idea because most glacial kettle holes have a fairly similar bottom because of how they're formed through glacial processes, but we want to check on that. And Kim also mentioned some other things like former water sources and former apparent drainage pipes that we've heard rumors of and seen some diagrams of, but we don't really know if anything is still partially intact or how something might be reconnected. So there are a lot of questions we have that we're trying to get some funding to look into, but we also have some working ideas about how to weave together all of the past efforts to try to manage Frog Pond, given the ways it's been used over time and the ways it's been modified heavily over time that have led to problems which are potentially acutely toxic. I don't think we've heard of any situation where poisoning due to surface contact, like people playing, kids playing in the water, or somebody petting their dog who was drenched with algae coming out of a swim or something. But both people, every year throughout Massachusetts, dogs die from splashing around in ponds just like this. And it's not rare for humans to end up getting neurological problems, things like tingling lips and loss of sensation in the hands, just from surface contact. So this is a serious issue. It's not just an aesthetic issue. It's not just about corrosion and blockage of the fountain. It's pretty serious. And it appears that the origin of the heavy metals came from some of the early military uses, and we know rope making happened. We don't know if some metals were being used as a preservative in some of the rope making processes at that time, but certainly if other metallurgy and leather tanning might have been happening, as those were also major military materials, that could be the source of some of the toxic metals present. Now, these aren't huge levels. This is not a modern industrial site, but it definitely has some problems. So it's understandable why the idea arose to dredge the pond to try to remove these things. But I would point out that the risk from heavy metals lying in the bottom of the pond does not actually, toxic heavy metals sound really bad, but harmful algae blooms of known neurotoxin containing algae is probably the real and present danger that puts people who come to the park at risk. So it would make the most sense to focus on that issue. And it would certainly make very little sense to dredge heavy metal content and leave total phosphorus content behind, which is in essence what the prior study focused on. I will note that there is no legal or regulatory trigger for doing anything for water quality. So there's actually no driver. It's not like the property is changing hands or something like that that would require a regulatory review and action related to the toxic metals. They've been there since Revolutionary War times, as far as we can tell. But it's actually the algae blooms that are of more urgent concern, and it's possible for the two to be dealt with together. I think Kim said it very well, pointing out that it's extremely expensive and ultimately doesn't really change much if you scoop out sediment and ship them somewhere else to be, in theory, hermetically sealed for a millennium, and at which point they're still toxic materials. So we thought it would be appropriate to propose essentially capping them in place with a relatively straightforward pond bottom liner proposal, to use a material to keep these toxic metals and the phosphorus from seeping upwards out of the bottom of the pond and entering the water column and posing risk to of the types I just outlined. So we also recognize that some of the desire in the past to have the idea of like, well, let's put good quality potable water in the fountain. Oh, maybe we don't have enough potable water, so let's stop using potable water. Let's just use pond water in the fountain. Oh, the pond water doesn't work in the fountain because it corrodes the pipes and clogs the nozzles and has all these other problems. So it's pointedly, it shouldn't be necessary to use potable water in a pond. It has never been adequate to have a functioning fountain in itself is not going to solve the degree of water quality problem that's present in the pond, just the same as that reverse osmosis technology was not a good match and did not work well in the pond. But just simply providing a barrier so that water is contained in the bottom of the pond more completely than it naturally would be, because naturally formed glacial kettle ponds typically end up with a bit of a natural clay liner that forms in the bottom of the basin, because the clay tends to be the particle size that you find in the massive ice blocks that lead to the formation of kettle ponds like this and the other kettle ponds around town. So, what we're planning on doing is kind of a very site-tailored approach to, in a way, making the pond function better in way, improving its functions to some of its former more natural levels, but doing so using some artificial means, and doing so while having an on-site remediation strategy, just capping things in place instead of trying to take them elsewhere. And the study that was done several years ago came up with over $500,000 just to simply scrape away the materials. The cost to ship and dispose of the materials, it was estimated to be probably more than twice that amount. In other words, it'd be up to $1.5 million to dredge the pond. But one of the problems is that capacity in these hazardous landfill sites, because that's what they would be classified as, you don't always have access to the capacity. Many of the ones throughout the Northeast have been filling up, and they also, you kind of have to get on the list so that your truckloads can go into that site at a particular schedule. So again, there are many benefits to just saying this has been here for hundreds of years. We're going to cap it off. So we keep it out of the water column. We'll put in a material that will do double duty to help contain more water on site. But we in fact want to we also put in a funding proposal that requested money to build 2 small redundant wells within the park. So we would just use relatively clean groundwater as the source water for the future restored fountain. And we are hoping to have some type of overflow drainage structure created, either by connecting to a long lost pipe that always served that function, that earlier served that function, or allowing the pond to reconnect to essentially a little bit of a seepage field. We could build a little corridor so that when water exceeds a certain level, it would decant off and re-enter groundwater through something akin to something like you'd have in a septic field, actually. So again, a fairly low tech, gravity-based approach is what we would aim for. So that's basically what we're aiming to do, but the way we need to verify how feasible that is to get a handle on the exact volume of sediment that we would need to remove in order, we know that there's going to be some, here's a good technical term, some gloppy, soupy, organic stuff hovering at the bottom of the pond. We want to understand how thick that sloppy, soupy, goopy layer is and the consistency of the layer beneath it. There was a lot of testing done to characterize the chemistry of the bottom, but there wasn't much done to characterize the loose, unconsolidated, basically the algae that went to the bottom to die. And we would propose to actually dry out the pond, let that material itself collapse and dry out under the sun, and have a simple removal process. And that would allow us to add some protective layers and a waterproof lining layer, and still keep the pond bottom approximately at the level that it functionally is today. We also, instead of trying to create a really deep pond, we think that it's a bit of ponds in recreational areas are often best left with most of their perimeter less than 3 feet deep. And we would probably choose to have a deeper spot so it promotes a healthy fish population and provides a more oxygen-rich refuge in the vicinity around the pond, where the water would be deeper, the temperatures of water would be cooler, that holds more oxygen, and the aeration effect of the fountain would also help. So we have a few we're focusing on water quality, we're focusing on water conservation, and we're looking at public safety and use. And these are our working ideas. And our next step is to get some money on hand to do some more detailed studies, which we hope to roll forward into an implementation plan. And we're interested in hearing how you guys feel about that. I know there've been a couple, not very many actually, but a couple permitted actions regarding this pond site. And one of the questions we have is, did anybody put a lot of thought into the designation of the resource areas and some of the modifications that have taken place over time? And how can we enter into a dialogue with the commission about working to restore some of the functions and values to this kettle hole pond, while also getting in there, doing some hands-on work to modify the current conditions?
Thanks, Wendy. Julia, actually, if you could go to the last slide, it kind of outlines mostly what Wendy just said in terms of our current plan. Yeah, that's it.
Here we go.
Yep.
Back into the slideshow format.
Yeah, so just roughly to recap. So our hope is to drain the water, let the muck dry out, and slightly resculpt it so that we have primarily 2 to 3 feet of depth, and then a deeper section to overwinter fish. Cap it. We're not really sure what that liner will be. We haven't designed it quite yet, but hopefully it's something that would prevent any mixing between the muck and the water, and then using shallow wells, refill it, keep it at a constant level, have an outlet for overflow, still not sure exactly what that looks like yet, restore the fountain and stabilize the edge. So again, our hope is that, in showing you the history of the pond and how it has really been engineered since the 1800s, we can start to have a dialogue with the Conservation Commission about the best ways to move forward. We have 2 CPC applications in process right now for about $300,000 for the wells, the bathymetric survey, a little bit of the stone for the edging, if the Conservation Commission would allow it, to stabilize that edge and to restore the fountain. So we're hoping to get money filtering in this year. We really want to hit the ground running on this as quickly as we can. We are searching for other means of funding for it, but it's our hope to get this project underway very soon.
So very soon, as in later this year?
Yes.
Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I don't, historically, was there a lot of vegetation, water plants in the pond? Because at one time, I think in my lifetime, there was nothing. And then there was Larry Olney, who was a member of the health board, took it upon himself to plant some cattails and pond lilies and things in there. And some people didn't like that, and they got taken out. So as far as vegetation goes, what is your plan?
Are expecting the concept that has come out of the historic architecture context, combined with reality check about how we have a steep embankment and the courthouse and some stairs. So I think 2 sets of granite stairs that really come down to the perimeter path, and then the pond. So it's kind of a site, it's a constrained site on one, really about half of the pond has a straight as a pin walkway parallel, but at the bottom of the hill along the old rope walk. And that area we're proposing to put a heavy granite block perimeter wall. And it will kind of blend with some of the other monumental architectural elements that are around. But on the opposite shore of the pond, we would actually propose using a carefully designed green infrastructure edge, which serves further as a water quality buffer, provides some good habitat. And it would be essentially, think of it like a perennial bed with wet feet. Irises and a few other related species are often really wonderful in a park setting and are pretty acceptable to everybody because they recognize them as part of a planned landscape, but also one that has ecological value, multiple ecological functions and values.
And I know Julia pulled up an old notice of intent. Julia, I think it was from 2004, 2005, if I'm remembering correctly, that there was an NOI that was filed to try to remove some of the invasive water plants that were in there. And I know prior to my time on the Parks Commission, I did reach out to the former chair of the Parks Commission, and I think there was some planting of material, plant material at one point. The hope was to try to aerate the pond and clean it up a bit, but it didn't work clearly. So I'm not sure where that leaves us, but that's a little bit of additional history that I was recently made aware of.
The reality is when we would be adding a liner material, it's imperative to have some way of vouching for the stability of the perimeter of the liner. Otherwise, that's the obvious weak point where things can bubble up from below and somehow make their way back into the pond. So that's why we want to take a little more proactive stance to provide some intentionally defined edge to the pond, but we don't want to make it all structural, but we think it's appropriate, if not necessary, to have a rather impressively structural edging on the most linear structured side of the pond.
What about all the ducks and geese that get in there and contribute to the phosphorus problem?
Yeah, I mean, one of the worst things is when people actually, waterfowl both take and leave nutrients. And if people come and feed them there, there's a lot of, ongoing nutrient inputs to the system. But, hopefully there's something of an equilibrium between how much plant life the waterfowl will gobble up and go deposit the nutrients elsewhere, and how much they have, they feed here and there around town and then come and deposit nutrients in the pond. It can go both ways, but we hopefully want to deter people from attracting people. We don't want kids and families feeding ducks at the pond. That's very hard to manage in the long term.
Because I think it was Walt Thompson that appeared before us a couple times with some plans for, and I think he had proposed putting up signs asking people not to feed the ducks. I don't know if that ever happened or not.
Don't think there are any.
No.
The programs I've been aware of that work best to do that involve things like getting second graders seem to be exactly the right age for this task, to have them create little artistic signs, draw pictures, have a little contest, and then laminate some of them. They don't even have to be long lasting signs. They can be cycled here and there, and the kids will be very proud of their signs, and people who come to the park will be a little more curious than if we professional adult types were to come up with signs. Tends to have a lasting cultural impact.
Well,
Wendy,
we'll leave that up to you.
Yeah.
Do we say, Julie?
Yeah, I have a question sort of similar to Steve's, which is, we've had existing problems in the past, whether it's been the ducks or the other animals that have contributed to the algae blooms. And it's still, even with the liner and cleaning out the existing muck, it's still going to be a shallow pond. And so my question is, are you sure that how sure are you that the influx of well water, fountain, and outlet are going to be enough to prevent that water from stagnating and eutrophying again? Is it going to be such a cycling of water through the system that can't happen again? Like, how much of an input of the well water and turnover will there be?
Well, we would be aiming to design this. I mean, ideally, we would simply want to have water being decanted out through a drainage system, relatively fresh and clean well water coming in, and an equal volume, and then rainwater coming in is also, of course, and then water decanting out into the town drainage system, or what we've heard rumors is an old dedicated pipe for that purpose. There are no records for it, but as Kim mentioned, there was a drainage channel that had formed that allowed the water from this kettle hole area to drain down Green Street, and if the Indiana Jones sleuthing goes well, we'll be able to find some trace of it and either potentially essentially connect into some structure that may still be there, or create some new similar version, or we'll just infiltrate it on site near the perimeter of the pond. So it should be possible to be able to manage nutrients on that basis, but it depends also on I'm not going to claim to be able to predict exactly how the waterfowl, if people will. I do think it's possible to manage feeding the ducks, but it's not easy to predict exactly how that will work. But for small urban ponds where human contact and pet contact with the water is considered a vulnerability, a potential hazard, it's not crazy to siphon out water, just almost similar techniques. There's equipment that's very similar to what people sometimes use on their home aquariums, where you just have a siphon vacuum that slurps up some of the pond muck from the bottom. And the grading of this pond would be such that the pond muck would tend to accumulate in the deepest,
Yeah.
lowest spot.
So is this something that involves some sort of ongoing maintenance in terms of it, like an operational budget involving the pumps for the well and the outlet structures and sort of cleaning every once in a while?
Well, we hadn't really budgeted the exact type. We hadn't specified the exact hardware. There've been some talks. It's not difficult for the purpose of running a couple of small redundant wells to actually have a few solar panels that would get the job done. So it may actually be a relatively less expensive operations process if we just put some on-site solar, and we don't have, the construction and operation of the power service is greatly simplified that way. And as far as the other ongoing nutrient removal, it's one of the reasons why it's so important to characterize how much sediment is there and have a detailed sediment budget prepared that would inform the future forecasts of what would be expected for nutrient levels and management levels of those nutrients in the future.
Do you have any sense of how long this is going to take to do the construction and so forth? It sounds like the pond is going to be out of circulation here for a good part of the spring and summer.
No, actually, no. There's no dewatering for the bathymetric survey to be performed. We just think that the dewatering we would propose simply dewatering the pond. It's a pretty small pond, and we would.
Well, as far as working with your surface, getting in there and so forth, I mean, it's going to take a while for this to dry out. That's what I was getting at.
Well, obviously, we would aim for summer season for getting that work done. And I don't want to minimize the amount of effort for dewatering a pond, 3-acre pond, basically. So it all depends. It depends on how the job is put out to contract, which in turn depends on the budget that's available.
Are there risks associated with sort of drying it out and pumping it out? In particular, I'm thinking odors. And has that ever been dried before? And are there complications that go along with that you can anticipate?
It tends to be a fairly short-lived problem. There are definitely some odors, but they tend to, as the drying, the vast area of the pond bottom is almost level or very gently sloped, although it has some deep spots that would be the areas that would be most stubborn to dry out. And yeah, it's not going to smell great, but it also, in its wet condition, doesn't smell very good. So.
In the dewatering, where is that water going to go?
Again, we want to double check on what's in the water column and also what's in sediment form, and we can choose where that goes. It's generally been proposed that even with the eutrophic nutrient levels, it probably doesn't need to go to the wastewater treatment plant, but we want to verify that. And again, we're just in the fact finding. These are very good questions, and these are among the questions we know we have to collect more data in order to develop a plan.
I don't know what's in the pond now for wildlife, frogs, turtles, fish. But in this drying out of the pond, they need to be preserved somehow.
We think because of the high level of algae that the quantity, the pond goes down to virtually no oxygen levels based on even visual assessment of the water quality. It has so much decaying plant life every summer that it has very, very low ability to support any animal life. That doesn't mean that there aren't some. And that's another thing we'll get a better handle on as we do the bathymetric survey. It tends to get creatures identified along the way. We're not proposing a wildlife survey or anything on the pond, though.
Right.
Are you familiar with another pond that's similar to this one where this approach has worked?
Not one with really a configuration quite like this. Not exactly. I personally have worked on several former kettle ponds with different histories, different types of use, and different sources of nutrient and other pollutant inputs. So this is, again, it's kind of a site-specific and tailored approach to using a variety of very common practices.
Do you have any idea how deep you'd have to drill down to get water for your wells?
Less than 100 feet is the estimate that I've heard.
Because you are at the top of the hill there.
Small hill.
You have any idea if the well, like, have they tested for the groundwater levels there? And is that well, is that potable water? I mean, what kind of an aquifer is that? Is there any information?
We don't have the information yet. We are, I think it's important to note here, we're not looking for pool water quality or potable water quality. We're looking for pond water quality. So, the thinking was that these wells would be somewhat shallow. And again, it's just to top off the water on an as needed basis. But we're certainly not anticipating this is going to become, pool quality that people are going to be swimming in here. We just want the toxic condition to go away.
Is there any concern though that because the metals under there, that the water quality that you'd be getting from those wells might not be safe?
No, these are metals in sediment are, for the most part, they tend to be very stable
Ground.
with the sediments.
Is that kind of testing proposed of the grants that you're applying for now? Like what's the scope of the two grants you're applying for?
So the first grants for the survey and the, was it the survey, the edging stone, and the two shallow wells. So we do have quotes for wells within some of the other parks that we used as a gauge for the depths of this well. And then we do have some monies from previous CPC applications that were to be used for doing some of this exploratory stuff. And again, the purpose of tonight was to kind of introduce this project to you. We'll have a lot more detail as we kind of get into it and do more of the design work, which will certainly come back and give you more information. But tonight we just wanted to give you an overview of our current thinking and the fact that we really want to move ahead with this, now because of the condition of the water.
So the article in the paper talked about having boats out there as a as an attraction. Is that still part of your plan?
It is, that's the longer range plan, but you know, you asked the question about maintenance and how are we going to maintain the quality of the water moving forward. So we're thinking about ways to bring revenue into that park. And I have been in communication with Lowell's Boat Shop over the last several years to try to get some flat bottom skiffs in there and bring Lowell's into Newburyport. That would be rented on the hour and try to bring some revenue into the park so that we can maintain this thing and we're not in this position in the next 50 years.
So that would require some sort of a structure on the land.
It would probably require a dock. But again, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here. Right now, we're trying to clean up the water and, you know, we'll think about those larger projects down the road. But again, we're just trying to figure out a way to make sure that once we do this project, that we have the money to continue to maintain it so that, again, the city's not in this situation in the next 50 years.
Okay. You got anything else? All right, well, I'm certainly looking forward to your submission. That'll be a few interesting meetings.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for your time, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kim and Wendy. That was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then. So we have no submissions this evening. So Julie, did we get anything regarding 1176th Street?
I actually, just before this meeting, I sent Tom an email about it after our last meeting. Tom Hughes, because he's the consultant on it, if you remember. And I just checked my email before this meeting started and got something back from him saying that he's working with Everett Chandler on the survey, et cetera, et cetera. He expects to have something for us next week. I told him we've been carrying it on the agenda and, you know, it was supposed to come in before the February 2nd meeting. And so that we were hoping that we could get a hard date for the filing. He indicated that it would be in next week. I will try to, I'm sort of out on vacation this week, semi up in Vermont. So I will try to get in touch with him again next week and just make sure that we have a schedule for it.
Okay. This next item, since I'm in a butter, I am going to recuse, and Steve, it is all yours.
Okay. Julia, you sent them a letter of violation or?
Yeah, so actually I have to apologize on this one. I prepared the letter of violation and was needed to send it certified mail last week and then wasn't able to go into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the office right now because of our weird COVID schedule and wasn't able to get in there and send it out. So I apologize that the notice of violation actually hasn't gone out yet. But one thing I wanted to ask you all is whether or not you'd like me to try to get any aerial photography or whether you feel comfortable just going forward with the visuals from next door neighbor. I think it's fine. I think it's probably enough to send the notice of violation given that we have actual photography. But again, we don't know where the wetland line is. And so I don't know if you wanted me to do that or not. We can still send the notice of violation and I can ask DPS to see if their drone's going to be used, if they could take a picture of that area and it could just be supplemental information.
That
Yeah,
sounds good.
I think with the pictures that the abutter sent, we could do the letter of violation, but it would also be a good, if we can get the DPS out there to take a picture.
Right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I'd say just go ahead with the letter for now, and if we can get the drone photography later, that'd be fine too.
Okay.
So that will have to go out on Tuesday, a week from today, just because I'm not in town and unfortunately don't have these people's email address. Hopefully we'll have a better update for the next meeting and that would be March 2nd. So yeah.
Okay. Back to you, Joe.
Alrighty then. I guess the last thing, do we want to, Gretchen?
Yeah.
Did you find it?
Yeah, the second page of the narrative in the NOI. It says the amount of living area being added is 131 square feet, and that's 25% less than the existing. And the sentence says the value of this increase in the size of the bedroom, $7,000, will be less than 50% of the value of the existing dwelling, which is 119,000.
You know what, Gretchen? I think because
Yeah.
that's in the NOI and not in the appraiser's report, I think it'd be the easiest thing to do is just take that information out of the minutes.
Yeah, I thought about that. It'd be yes, because there's different numbers in the appraisers.
Yeah, and just reference that the appraisal shows that it's less than a 50% increase.
Right. Yeah,
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't even discuss the 7,000 at the
Right.
meeting.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that was a good point, Dave.
Okay. Any other changes to the minutes?
Motion to approve as amended.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Anybody opposed? Okay.
can we talk just briefly about the Plummer Spring Lane or Road or whatever it is?
What
You
the
know,
bridge?
when we went out there for the site visit, I had asked the question in the meeting about, did we really need a bridge there? And the response was, yeah, there's 900 cars a day use it. But while we were out there on the site visit, it was quite surprising how many people were out there walking. And the guy with the horse,
Mhm.
and, John Eric mentions, with the bridge being closed, that it turned into kind of a linear park, which is a nice thought. So I guess, what are people's thoughts about saying we don't need a bridge or just a pedestrian bridge? We don't need a vehicle bridge.
Well, that would be a tough sell at this point. It really does still stay a linear park. People are still going to use it. People riding bikes are going to go through there. People walking are going to go through there. The horse is going to go through there. It's going to be a less dangerous bridge than what was there before.
Right.
It seems a bit out of our jurisdiction to make a decision like that on an existing bridge.
Yeah, I would expect we would be summarily ignored on that.
I think it's a good question though, Steve, and to be totally honest, the same thing went through my head when they first came forward with this, because it's been closed for so long and it doesn't seem to, I don't live over there. So I guess my assumption is that the feedback, the negative feedback on turning it into just a linear park would be from the people who live in those neighborhoods on either side, because of the convenience for them of having the connector through, but I don't know.
It's been 2 years and
Right.
maybe there have been a lot of complaints, but I don't know.
Yeah. There's significantly more people in the West Newbury side. There's only a couple houses in Newburyport, but there's a ton more in West Newbury, and a lot of it's going on in West Newbury too. So I don't think West Newbury is going to sign on to that,
Right.
because it's a access to Newburyport for those families, and there is a business that retreat there just further up on the left into West Newbury that it would make it less convenient. Obviously, you can still get there, but
Well, it's just odd that we're putting in a new bridge that has a sidewalk that's 5 feet wide, and there's no sidewalk on either side of the bridge.
yeah, well, they have.
And they don't want people fishing off the bridge, yet they've made it more convenient for them.
Well, off of one side, I guess they know people are going to fish from there. That's going to happen.
So maybe what we could propose or something is put a sidewalk in on the road and make it safer for everybody. Not as part of this project, I understand that, but you know, in the future.
Mhm.
Anyway,
I think they're really good points, Steve. I really do. I haven't heard anyone bring these up, and that may be because the people in charge of this project are engineers and DOT. And so they're not thinking along those lines, but I think they're really good questions. So I think it's, you know, worth pressing them on answers for that.
okay, well, I don't mind doing that at the next meeting. We'll see what West Newbury thinks about it.
How's that gonna work as far as our next meeting with, it was gonna be a joint meeting with West Newbury? Is there any?
Yeah,
movement?
I don't know how we're gonna handle that, because they meet on Mondays. We meet on Tuesdays.
Wait, was that just, I'm sorry, I missed that site visit. And was that discussed at the site visit to have a joint actual commission meeting?
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
but I'm not sure it was with the next, they had so much work to do to add in the new stuff. That.
Okay, well, I'll
maybe
ask
we
John
would-
Eric about that.
Yeah, we would have a separate meeting and then have a joint meeting afterwards. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would certainly make more sense.
And
All these joint meetings, I don't like these joint meetings.
No.
But it's just, I don't know how that would get handled. Maybe we need to meet on a different night, a Wednesday or a Thursday night.
Hmm.
But,
flip a coin or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. I will absolutely ask John Eric if that's something that they are working on, if that's something they were thinking that we were planning. They would have to, you're right, it would have to be, we would join in on their meeting or they would join in on our meeting somehow to get that done. And I'm not even totally sure why it would be necessary.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
you
not
know
sure.
what I mean?
They had requested it, I believe. I
Oh.
don't think it was West Newbury. I think it was the design team.
Yeah, I think so.
I think they wanted to avoid orders of conditions that were conflicting or, you know, so different that it was difficult to
Got it.
manage.
Well, that makes sense, but we can do that in other ways. We certainly could do it at a joint public meeting, but it's also possible that they could send us a draft of their special conditions ahead of time, and we could send them a draft of our special conditions ahead of time, or we could each community could send our draft to the applicant, and then they can take a look at that and give each community feedback on how to make them meet in the middle. We did that with the Whittier Bridge, with Amesbury, and that worked pretty well. So that might be easier because I'm just feeling like a joint commission meeting, then the voting gets a little complicated. Public attendance and the minute taking and all that could just get more complicated than we need it to be.
Yeah, when they brought that up, my first thought was the Whittier Bridge. We managed to do a much bigger project without needing a joint commission meeting with Amesbury. So I think we can handle it.
I can coordinate with the applicant through the West Newbury Conservation Agent to make sure that we get a relatively consistent order. If that's what they're curious about. I'll talk to John Eric.
Julia, is it in our normal orders of conditions that the refueling takes place some distance away? Because this might require some special thought on that, being near the reservoir.
Yeah, I believe that is always in there in one of our boilerplates. I know that it's definitely in there that there can be no storage of fuel oils or urethanes within the resource area buffer zone. I don't know if refueling itself is part of that, so I'll check, and that's a good point. We can try to make sure that gets in as a special condition.
Yeah, they would probably have, there's going to be big equipment sitting there, you know, driving sheet pile and stuff like that, you know, they're going to need to refuel. So I guess we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So,
Julia, do we
And we can
have,
talk, this is on our agenda for the,
I was gonna ask do we have items for next meeting at this point, or you don't know yet?
yeah, that's actually the only item that this Plummer Spring Road Bridge is the only permit application item for our next meeting. Other than unless we get something from Tom Hughes, which to be honest, would have had to have come in last Friday in order to be on the March 2nd meeting. So for March 2nd, it's Plummer Spring Road and it's follow-up on the enforcement. That's it.
Were they gonna be ready for the March 2nd, or was it the one after that? I can't recall.
The last meeting on February 2nd, they said March 2nd. They may or may not be ready. Maybe they'll continue. If they continue, we wouldn't have very much on for March 2nd.
yeah, I would think if they don't continue, then I would think we're gonna cancel the meeting.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't see a big
Not
point.
enough.
no, not from Tom's weekly promise that he's gonna have it next meeting.
Yeah.
Right, right. So you can go to Florida, David, if that's what you're
I'm
thinking.
not going to Florida.
Why not? You don't have to wear a mask down there, Dave.
Yeah, I know. Everything's wonderful down there
Uh-huh.
because they have such a great governor.
Mhm.
All right, we got anything else?
Nothing.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor? Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
opposed? All right. Carol,
Hey,
nice
everyone.
meeting you.
Nice to meet you, Carol. Good night.
Okay.
All right, good night.
Aye.
Right.